Hi everyone! I haven't tried a video like this before, but I thought it'd be fun. A speed paint of me drawing all the new character portraits for the Daernika site while I talk a bit about each character and the history of their designs. First though, here's a quick explanation of what Daernika is itself. It's a Dungeons & Dragons campaign I was in college, which is now a webcomic, hence the character art for the webcomic site. It basically retells the story of the campaign, with a few things streamlined for the sake of the format. The character portraits I'm going to be doing are for the main characters of the comic, who were the player characters in the D&D campaign. And yes, we started with 7 player characters, and most of us had never played D&D before. Our DM was wonderful, and kept that from turning into a disaster. Our characters didn't get along very well to begin with, but over the course of the game they got closer and had character development and so on. Now, this campaign was actually 4th edition D&D. When we started playing, the early stuff for 5e had just come out, and we wanted to stick with an edition that had more content. Our DM already had some 4e stuff, I think, and one of the players had read through all the 4e books even though he hadn't gotten a chance to play yet. The other person who had played before was mostly familiar with Pathfinder. The campaign ran from November 2014 through May 2018, and I started posting the comic in May 2018, and it's been going consistently up through now. It used to update a couple pages each week, then went down to usually a page a week once I had to get a part-time job, and now it updates monthly with about 6 pages per update, which has ended up being a pretty good balance for me. There's over 200 pages now, so that's neat. This campaign really meant a lot to me, and I love the story of it, so let's talk about the characters. First is Daernika, who is mine. She's a tiefling warlock who specializes in fire magic. Her pact in 4th edition terms was the Infernal Pact, which in 5th edition is closest to the Fiend Patron both flavor-wise and mechanically. I'll talk a bit about her design first. Mainly it's her horns that have changed over time. Here's the first drawing of her I ever did, the night I made her character sheet. I did a redraw a couple weeks ago actually, and it turns out the design is decent. I just couldn't draw very well at the time. She kept those curved horns for a while through a couple outfit changes, and then I switched to these weird horns after I realized how impractical the original ones are. I was also worried about her not looking like a proper tiefling according to the player's handbook, horns-wise at least, which I now realize is an incredibly stupid worry to have. I didn't realize that most people just make tieflings however they want anyway, and people wouldn't judge me for it. Now, I'm more worried that people will judge me for not making her some rainbow color and giving her a skin tone that could be human instead, that people will think she's boring. In my defense, she was my first D&D character ever, and when I made her I hadn't seen much D&D art online either. Since her final horn design, I've really only changed small things. She's got a second outfit from the second half of the campaign, and figuring out how her tail works in both of these was difficult. When I first made Daernika, she was pretty one-dimensional personality-wise. She's selfish, impulsive, book-smart, and curious. She believes that she can only trust herself. She comes from a small village where she grew up pretty isolated. Her village didn't like tieflings much, so her parents kept her away from other people as much as they could in an attempt to protect her. She turned to magic as a way to get power and agency for herself, and ran away from home at 16. When the campaign starts, she's 23 and has lived on her own for a long time. Now, being new to D&D, I didn't think very much at first about how she got her magic, beyond, oh, she made a pact of some sort with mysterious dark forces, via what I read about warlocks in the player's handbook. About halfway through the campaign, I started thinking about who her patron might be, and I talked to the DM about it. And the answer the DM came up with is a big spoiler for the comic, but let's just say she ended up really tied to the campaign's story, and some early stuff was able to get retconned in a way that didn't actually change anything and worked really well. At the beginning of the campaign, and where we are in the comic right now, Daernika doesn't technically know she's a warlock. She believes she just spontaneously developed magic at some point. Her story arc is mostly about learning to care about and trust other people. Even though she started out kind of flat, she became one of the most complex characters I've ever had, and probably the one I know best and feel most comfortable playing. Once in a while we have one-shot reunion sessions for Daernika, and it feels really good to be able to step back into that story and a character dynamic I know really well. Next we have Vox. His full name is Vox Lamont Ferellian, and he's a human warlord. Warlord is one of the 4th edition base classes. It's basically a fighter, but with a lot of powers that involve buffing allies and giving allies extra attacks and stuff like that. Basically a battlefield leader. His design has stayed mostly the same, plus or minus some chainmail and color adjustments. I've just gotten a lot more comfortable drawing him over time. A little ways into the campaign, he gets a beard and scar and red line on his armor, so a lot of my art of him that isn't for the comic has that stuff. The first time I drew him, I hated drawing armor, but late in the campaign when our characters met an NPC named Cadis, who became my favorite character, I really wanted to draw her, and she had even more armor, so I basically tricked myself into learning to draw armor. Which is good, because this comic is meant to have to draw a whole lot of it. Vox is, as his class may suggest, a natural leader, but he doesn't really want this. He was a soldier for the Aviros Legion, and then left to join a mercenary company called the Minutemen. He eventually left them as well, and was basically just traveling on his own and trying to help people when he met the party. He's from a region in the southwest called Publia, though he's not from the main city itself. He's from a town near the Murmuring Marsh. He lost his family when he was pretty young, and lost is even more apt of a word since first his father vanished in the marsh, and then his brothers vanished too when they went to search for him. He was mostly raised by a family friend named Marcus. He's lost friends, too, in a huge battle in the marsh that he was part of while he was in the Legion. He's scared of not being strong enough to save the people he cares about, and he's very loyal and always tries to do the right thing. A strange ability has shown up for him, despite him having no magic. He has visions. It's unclear at this point in the comic what they mean, but since one of them was a vision of another character's life, it seems likely that the others are also real events. In game terms, they started as a "you see everything" joke when he crit a perception check, but then turned into an actual thing that triggers whenever he gets a natural 20 on a perception or insight check. As for why in universe, well, there's an explanation, but that would be future spoilers. And now we have Nakama. She's an elf cleric of Sayanine. I think in most D&D lore, elves are adults at like 100 or something, but we didn't know that. So the way it works in Daernika is that elves mature at around the same rate as humans, but then don't really grow visibly older after that for a very, very long time. So Nakama's in her 60s, which in our logic is like a young adult for an elf. Her original design was white, but toward the end of the campaign, Real Life Nakama and I decided to change her design. I'm really glad we did, because I love her design now. Some of my art of her late in the campaign has this tattered robe thing, and that's an item she gets like a third of the way through. Her god, Sayanine, is the god of the moon, autumn, love, and trickery. She's from the pantheon described in the 4E sourcebooks, as is all of Daernika's pantheon except 2. Sanctus, who's sort of in charge of all the other gods, and a god specific to a faction who is kinda spoilers. Early on in the game, and sort of recurring, Nakama tended to miss a lot of spells, and there was a running joke of her getting frustrated with Sayanine for it, since Sayanine's the source of her power. So that just sort of became canon that she doesn't always get along with her god. There were a couple moments later though where Nakama crit with one of her basic powers and killed 2 different final bosses that way, so trade-offs. And her actually talking to Sayanine in person later are some of my favorite scenes. She's the main healer of the group, which we definitely need. Any battle she wasn't there for, we tended to almost lose or even have characters die during. She's desperate to protect the group, even though she tends to argue with, since like Vox, she's lost a lot of people during her life. Because of it, she doesn't cope with loss very well. She was even married at one point to someone in her former adventuring party who were all followers of Sayanine, but her husband died. She tries to help everyone, and often jumps into situations without thinking, like trying to save everyone in the starter village in the attack, as opposed to Vox, who often overthinks. Next is Tim. He's an Eladrin wizard, but in 4E, Eladrin are basically just high elves, unlike in 5E, where I think they're Fae based on the seasons or something. So he's basically a high elf, while Nakama's a wood elf. I made his ears longer, plus we discovered like 10 or 15 sessions in that Eladrin don't actually have pupils, so that was a surprise. We also realized that he's around 100 and not old, because again, elves. When he was first described to me when I did the original round of character portraits for the group in 2015, which we also used to make laminated initiative tracker cards, so that was fun, he was mentioned as having white hair, so my brain just sort of went, oh, old wizard, which was incorrect. Anyway, I've drawn him with a few different outfits, and even though I've stuck with the same one in the comic so far, in recent chapters he's also got a scarf and a wizard hat, and I'll probably change around his outfit a bit over time, which I also will for Dina, she has a few with her. I'm writing out the script for this video actually before I sketch any pages for chapter 9, though I think by the time the video is made and posted it will have at least started, but I think I'm going to change at least Dina's outfit for this chapter, possibly Tim's also. They don't have armor, so I can kind of just do whatever I want with it. Tim's sort of signature spell ended up being Cloud of Daggers, which in 4th edition is an at-will power like a cantrip. Tim has amnesia at the start of the campaign. This is because, in out-of-universe reasons anyway, real-life Tim didn't have any ideas for a backstory, so he and the DM decided that Tim had amnesia, and that the DM would fill in the details over time. At this point in the comic, Tim started to get his memory back, though the only personal detail he's got so far is that his full name is Timanther, and he used to know a lot more magic than he currently does. For him, leveling up is basically remembering more of his former spells. He also knows how he got amnesia. He was in a teleportation accident when he was trying to track down someone who stole a scroll from him, who turned out to be a Dina, which I had figured out with the DM at the beginning of the campaign as a way to tie a Dina to the party. Next is Arva. His full name is Arvaragium Peacebreaker, and he's a dwarf paladin. His design has pretty much stayed the same, but drawing his chainmail was taking absolutely forever, so after chapter 1 I gave him a coat to wear over it. The god Arva follows as a paladin is the god Corellin, an elven god of magic. Dwarves here aren't supposed to use magic, and Arva got into it because his girlfriend was involved in magic. Corellin appealed to him for a sense of freedom, especially since he felt even more limited because his family was important and well-known, and he had to live up to the expectations from that. Unfortunately, things went badly, and through various events, Arva's girlfriend died, and he ended up with a demon problem. He left to travel on his own, trying to solve the demon issue as well as help anyone he came across. Arva has a strong sense of justice and morality. He will absolutely always choose to do what he believes is right. What is right isn't always in agreement with laws or practical concerns, but he tries to keep to his own code no matter what. Even more than Nakama and Vox, he's a moral compass of the group, though it's often very difficult to get the group to listen to him given that Dina and Wild and Benjamin exist. And here's Wild. He's a halfling ranger with a bunch of different weapons. His first design was based on a drawing his player did, and since then his outfit's changed somewhat. From the start of the comic to now, his hair's sort of poofed outward, and I like it a lot better now than in chapter 1. As a halfling, he's really short compared to the other characters, which is really hard to keep consistent, actually. He's basically as tall as a halfling can be. I think he's like 4'2", and Arva as a dwarf is like 4'7". His full name is Wild Wolfgang. Wild's a bit lost at this point in the comic, and trying to figure out his path forward. 50 years ago, there was a huge disaster called the Cataclysm, in which another continent crashed into Daernika thanks to very powerful magic. A new mountain range was created called the Broken Spine Mountains, and multiple cities were destroyed, including Wild's home. He went to the other continent to try to get answers or some form of revenge, but he got stuck in a mysterious forest where time moves far more slowly. 50 years passed for the rest of the world, and when he emerged, he didn't actually realize yet that he'd been displaced in time. He's gotten what work he can, and was even hired as an assassin shortly before meeting the party. And lastly, we have Benjamin, a human rogue. His full name is Benjamin Hartson, though he first introduced himself to the party as Greg. His design stayed mostly the same as it was the first time I drew him, but just got generally better. I remember struggling to figure out a design for him when I first drew everyone, and I remember asking the friend who played him, what shape are Benjamin's eyebrows? Which everyone apparently thought was a very funny question. Benjamin is secretive, is paranoid for good reason, and has killed and stolen from a lot of people. I don't want to spoil too much of his story for those who haven't read the comic yet, but he grew up in a theater troupe, lost most of his family, and is currently doing anything he can to protect the one person he has left. He's basically the plot hook for the first season of the campaign, and this was possible because he was originally going to also be a DM. We had a couple more people interested in playing at first, so we were going to split into 2 groups set in the same world, with both DMs also playing a character in the other DM's party. So they started building the world together, and then a couple people decided that they either weren't that interested or were too busy to play every week, so we merged into one group again. Real-life Benjamin didn't know any of the really big twists that we ended up with later, but he knew enough about the world that he and the DM were able to use Benjamin as a way to pull everyone else into the bigger story. And that's everyone. Thanks for watching and listening to me ramble on about these guys. If you're interested in reading Daernika, there's links in the description. The portraits are up on the site already, and Chapter 9 started this past Friday. Let me know in the comments below if you like the style of video or if you'd want to see more. It was fun to make, and I'd like to hear suggestions of topics you'd want me to make these videos on. Thanks! Love you guys!